Okay, so let's look at them. Let's get into it. Okay, so that sort of gives you an idea of what's going on here. So I'm going to go and grab a cloner. Okay, and you'll see when you pull any of these out, the majority of them are going to look like null objects. They're going to look like they're empty. Okay, but you'll see that in the attributes manager, they're going to have a lot of options. So they do have coordinates. They do have the basic tab like you see in a lot of objects. They have an object tab. You see here I open up the object tab for the cloner and whoa, there's so much stuff in here. And then you have transform settings, and then you also have this effectors tab. Which is empty, but this is where you would drop one of these purple guys. You would drag them out, you get them into the object manager, and then you drop them in here, and these would affect the Mograph object that you're using. Okay, so for the cloner to work, I need something for it to clone. So I'm going to go and grab myself a cube, and I'm going to make it a little small one. Okay, and what you do is you actually take the object and you make it a child of the Mograph object. Okay, you can see as soon as I do that, I've got 3 of them. Okay, and that is because the default here is actually 3. So if I zoom out for a second, you'll see that I can pull this up and make more or less. Okay, again, the default is 3, but you can have as many as you want. You'll see that there's an offset as well that will let you push away from 0, because that is where the cloner is right now, is at 0, 0, 0. The offset will let you push away from the starting point of the Mograph object. Again, anything with a little dial next to it means that you can animate it. Okay, so you have a couple of things in here. You have mode, you have clones, you have the count, you have position, scale, and rotation, and then you have some step stuff. We're not going to talk about all of it because some of it is quite complicated. We just want to talk about the basics right now, and then we could always come back if something comes up. Okay, so the mode, I have linear is what you're looking at now. That means you're going to get it in a straight line, your clones. I have radial. And you can see here now, when you change the mode, you are going to get different options. So before you were looking at the linear options, now we're looking at the radial options. Okay, so my count is here. Okay, radius is right underneath it, and you will need to adjust that if your circle here is too small. If you need to add more clones and you don't have enough room, you can adjust the radius to make sure that you do. If you don't want it in the plane that it is in, you could always change that. So now I got that up and down. Okay. And then start and end angle. This is great because you could end up animating this. You can see how that would be really cool. But the start is at 0, the end is at 360. So if you didn't want that to be like that, you could adjust it. You could also offset it so that 0 is not over here, sort of at the top of the circle. So lots and lots of options you have, depending on what mode you're in. They're very different, but they're pretty intuitive. Okay, so that's radial. That's how you get your clones to be in a circle. You have a grid array. Okay, and this is how you'll be able to make a grid. So again, you could do the count here. I'm going to do an even number, so I'm going to put 8. That would be how many, if you count here, how many I'm going across in the X. This is the Y. Okay, and this is the Z. All right. So with the grid array, you could decide how many clones you're going to have in X, Y, or Z. Okay, and obviously you can get a lot pretty quickly, but that's definitely super helpful because obviously you've got everything lined up. Now, you don't have to keep it as uniform as it is. Those are things that we can change later, but this starting out, this is what the cloner is going to do. Okay, so the next one there is going to be honeycomb array. This one is kind of a newer one. It's a little bit different. You can see here, it's staggered. okay, as opposed to the grid array that was definitely very uniform. Um, it's still uniform, but you can see every other one is staggered, is a little offset. Okay, so you can come in here, you can change the orientation, you can change that offset there. And again, that's something that you could animate. Okay, and if you see a little arrow here, you could always open that and then see what that will let you do. The reason I mentioned that is because the offset here has a variation so that they don't all have to be exactly the same. You see, that introduces a little bit of difference between each one of those um, offset uh, rows. Okay, and then we have the count here for the height and the width. It doesn't go back in Z. Again, that's different from the grid array. Okay, and then you have width and height. Um, this is not going to change anything right now for you. Okay, so if I go back to the very first one, object, this one is the first one, but it's definitely a very interesting one. It's not quite like the others. The object mode is if you want to clone this shape onto another object. Super interesting thing to be able to do. So if I had a sphere and I wanted to cover this sphere with all of those little cubes, okay, I could come in here to my cloner, okay, and I would switch the mode to object, and then you can see down here there is an object field. I would drag my sphere into there. Okay, now you can see that there's little cubes dotted randomly all over it. Now that's because of the option that I'm using. So you can come in here and see what you want to change. My distribution is on surface, so that's why you're seeing that it's like a little random clusters of cubes. But you could definitely come in here and change that. I could say I want it on every vertex, which would be essentially every point. I could say that I want it on every edge. I could say that I want it on every polygon center. Okay. Surface is the one we were looking at, the default. Volume is, that one's a little tricky because it's more interior based, but definitely useful. Let me see if I can show you guys. Go in here. Yeah, there we go. I'm inside my sphere. You can see that the cubes, the clones are actually inside of the sphere. So I could definitely make enough clones to sort of fill that up. So that would be volume. And then last is axis. I don't know if we're going to see that in here. You can see that there's one in there. So those ones you probably won't find that you'll be reaching for right away. But the other ones, vertex, edge, polygon center, surface, maybe volume it didn't fill up. They definitely help you for a lot of different things that you might want to do. So if you find yourself wanting to cover one surface with another another object, you could actually use this Mograph cloner for that. Very interesting. So if I go to the sphere and I change it to something like icosahedron, then you can go back in here and change it to like edge, and then you get these really interesting collection. And then you don't have any of that weird overlap that happens when it's on the standard. You can see here that each one of those edges has a cube in the center of it. Okay? Really cool. All right. Now what you could also do is, let me show you, if I were to put this on the vertex, okay, you're not even limited to just one object. If I wanted to have something sit on the points, the vertexes, and I wanted something else to sit on the edges, I could come in here and I could go and I could just repeat what I just done. I can get myself another object. Say I want a cylinder to be on the in between those little points. I want to see on the edges. I want to have a cylinder sitting there. So I could go in there, I can get myself another cloner. Okay, take the cylinder, put it in there, switch to object, feed the sphere into there. You can see now I'm going to make it edges. And you can see it covers the whole thing. It's too big, and that's fine. You can just go and scale the original cylinder down. Okay, and really what I want to do is I want to make the radius smaller, and I want to make the height bigger. And there we go. And now we got a very interesting shape that we've made using our cloner. Obviously this would be something, this sort of complex shape would be a lot of work if you were going to be modeling something like this yourself. But you can see how quickly we were able to do it using this Mograph cloner object. Now, if you are interested, you do not need to keep that sphere that, and as in keep, I mean you don't have to make it visible. If you wanted to actually just look at the clones and you were using the sphere or the object just as the form, but you don't actually want to see it when you render, you could turn that off. Okay, as long as it still exists, it's fine. But if you turn it off, then when you render it, you're actually going to render that ball that we just made with the cloner, but you're only going to be rendering the clones. If you do want to see the sphere, then by all means you can leave it on, but you don't have to. If you're using it for the form itself, and you want to be able to turn it off, you can. So you could just keep the cloners to do the job that they're doing, and then you could have the sphere be the form that the clones are taking the shape of, but you don't actually need to keep it for rendering. Now, if you delete it, it's going to cause the cloners to lose shape. But if you just don't want to have it be visible in a render, then you can definitely make it inactive. Okay, so that would be, so that this interesting setup that we're doing. This is the cloner object, and the mode is set to object mode. Okay, and then I've given it a sphere as the object, so I had to drag it from my object manager and drop it in here. Okay, and there's all sorts of things here. There's offset. There is, if you open this up, there's ways for you to adjust the object within the cloner object manager's settings. You can come down here and change other stuff. So lots and lots of things that you have access to inside these panels. So you definitely will want to go through once you're feeling comfortable about how you set up the Mograph objects. Definitely, I encourage you guys to go through here and start sort of tinkering around with what each of these things do. Okay, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it in a null object. Group those. Okay. And hide that. Okay, and I'll make you a new one so we could look back at the settings. So again, oh, I think I'm upside down. There we go. Didn't notice I was completely upside down. Okay, so I'm going to get myself another cloner. Okay, and I'll get myself cubes again because they're nice and simple. And I don't have to worry about crashing Cinema 4D. Okay, so again, I take that object and I put it into the Mograph object cloner. Okay, and so this is linear, and again, I could have as many counts as I want. I could offset it as much as I want. Okay, now you can change the scale if you feel like they're too big or too small. Scale usually works. The things that don't work now is if you try to rotate, you'll see that rotating, the rotate tool doesn't work, and the position tool doesn't work for the cube. Okay, and that's because those two have been overridden by the cloner object. It still lets you scale, so you can still use the scale tool on this. Okay, but that's the only one out of the three. The rest of them are you're going to have to use the transform tab to be able to move it. Okay, so that doesn't mean you can't do it, you just have to know where to look to do it. Okay, so when you're in the cloner settings, okay, the cube settings are going to be all the normal stuff that you're used to. The cloner settings is going to be in the object tab. Again, it's going to be different for each mode. We'll have different settings. A lot of them are going to have this per step section down here, which is essentially another mode. What this will do is it will let you control how each clone is interpreted. So right now you'll see that it says 50 in the Y, and that is the space between each clone. Okay, so if you like the size of this, but you want them to be closer together, or you want them to be much more space between them, then you can come down to this per step section, and I could say, okay, I want 100 centimeters between each one. If I do the X, you can see here that I sort of make sort of a stair step effect, and each one is pushed off, in this case by 66 centimeters from the last one. And I'll zero that one out. And then same thing for Z. Okay. You could do the same thing with scale. Okay, very interesting. So that as they get, in this case, as each clone comes out, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, you could also go negative if you wanted to. You will have ones that sort of invert there. Okay, and you could do that for X, Y, and Z. Okay, and I'm going to actually put the X up for this one so you can see it. Because if you go to rotation, you can see that you can rotate, and again, it won't be the same value for each one. Each one will be having the rotation applied to it a little differently than the one before it. Again, depending on which one you choose. So that's rotating in Z. This is rotating in the X, looks like. Okay, and then you could switch this to endpoint, but we're going to leave it on step. Okay, and then the amount here, you could actually, that's again an interesting one to be able to animate. You could start it at 0, and you only see the one clone, and then as you go up to 100, you would see the rest of it. And so they kind of like spring out there. Whether they actually have a springy effect would be based on your keyframes, but you can see here that you're going from 0 is no clones, and then 100% you're seeing all the clones, and spaced out to the max that you outlined out here. Okay, so again, you can go to the cloner. The goal of the cloner is it's going to be taking whatever object you feed into it, and it's going to make multiple copies. Okay, they're all going to rely on the first one. So if you change the first one, it should update all the rest of them, whether that's a primitive or whether that is a model that you're working on. The first one is the real one, then all the other clones that are going to be made from it are copies. So when the first one changes, the copies will update. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, again, we can use this both for modeling and for animating. So sometimes you'll use the cloner because you want to have multiple copies of a part of your model, and you don't have to copy and paste it over and over again. The advantage here is that if you use the cloner and again you update that part of your model, all of the parts will update, as opposed to if you copy and pasted it, then you would have to go back to each one and you would have to fix it, or you would have to get rid of them and then copy and paste them all over again. So the cloner saves you so much time in that scenario. The other scenario obviously is that you have multiples here that you can animate. So whether it's the count going up and down, whether it's the offset, whether it is the step amount, all of this stuff, if there's a dial here, you can animate it. And obviously at this point we're really focusing on animating, so hopefully you can look at this and be able to start visualizing how you might want to use it for animation. Okay, but you can see that in all of this, no matter what you do here, it's still pretty uniform. You can definitely get it to look different per clone, but in the grand scheme of things, it's nice and even, and everything's sort of evenly distributed. So you know that if you're putting an amount here, it's being applied to each clone, so you don't end up having irregularities there. If you want irregularities, then you can certainly use an effector to help you do that. But if when you're starting out, you probably want to have everything be clean and line up well, and that's where the cloner is going to start out, so that everything is uniform. Okay, and then transform here, you can see that you could move things around position-wise, scale-wise, and then rotation. Okay, and each one of those is going to be applied to each clone, stronger as it's going up the chain there, for the most part. Okay, so that's the cloner object. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's a great tool, so whether you're modeling or animating, you'll probably find scenarios where you'll come and want to use the cloner to accomplish something, even if it's only 2 clones. It can be quite useful. Okay,